BrianMcLaren is an author, speaker, activist, and public theologian. A former college English teacher and pastor, he is a passionate advocate for a new kind of Christianity, just, generous, and working with people of all faiths for the common good.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cameron Trimble. I'm the CEO of Convergence, and I am thrilled to be in conversation with my friend and colleague, BrianMcLaren, who we have been creating mischief in the world for a lot of years. I think it was, we knew each other before this, but I think it was in 2013 that you and I went to Thailand, and that's where we really got quality and quantity time.
That's right.
Exploring a global progressive faith movement.
Yeah, a lot of people, when they think of going to Thailand, they think of beautiful beaches. And we started our week up to our knees in excrement, human, ox, cow, and other, in an incredible experience planting rice in a little village in central Thailand. But that's for another time and another story.
That's right. Yes, it is the perfect way to bond, I will say.
That's true.
So we have had an ongoing conversation, a wondering together about the future of Christianity, the future of faith, of, you've always been a wonderful, helpful conversation partner for me in understanding kind of the dynamics of the world and what is happening. The topic at hand for today's conversation is the future of spirituality. And in the context, we've named this event Courageous Faith, because my instinct is that there's a kind of courage that's required to live in these kind of liminal days. So I want to just start with a big, giant question, which both of us love. And I want to know your instincts. Do you see a future for spirituality? And if so, what are the contours of that for you?
Yeah. So I see a future for spirituality. I see a future for religion. I see a future for atheism. And I think part of the reality is all of these things are going to coexist in all kinds of ways, some harmonious, some not so harmonious. But Cameron, a useful frame for me lately on this is to just think about the human problem, the human predicament. And one way to describe it is evolutionarily, that we inherit this amazing brain from from hundreds of millions of years of evolution. And we start with that kind of reptilian brain that's survival oriented, so well honed. I mean, we look down on this, people call it the primitive brain, but you could say it's actually the most advanced brain in the sense that it's the fastest. It's had the longest to evolve, back from fish and amphibians and reptiles and mammals all the way up to us. And then we have this mammalian brain that is the herd instinct part of our brain. It's the part of our brain that has been our secret to success as a species, our ability to live together in groups and to cooperate, and that teamwork and all the rest. That's our belonging brain, our mammalian brain. It has to do with, of course, that word mammalian comes from mammary glands, the bonding that happens between a mother and a baby. But then that bonding is extended to family and to extended family and to tribe and clan. And then we extend it to nation and species. And part of our huge problem now is we have to extend it to the whole species and then to all of the ecosystem. And we can do it. I know it's there, but we just have hundreds of thousands of years of practice not doing it. And then we have this human brain that somehow unleashes this consciousness, this ability to not only think, but to think about our thinking. And not only the ability to feel, but the ability to observe our own feeling. And when you take the complexity of dealing with those three different modules of a brain, suddenly we human beings have all this set of problems of consciousness. And I think, among other things, when we talk about spirituality, what we're talking about is the intentional management of our own consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there is one way that could not have a future, and that is if we ended up in a situation of such desperation that for a period of time, all we were functioning as is that sort of survival and maybe tribal belonging mode. And we just were in such a state of trauma and emergency that we couldn't get beyond that for a while. But I don't think it's going away. I think it's part of who we have evolved to be.
Yeah. I'm struck. That is a really helpful frame. And I'm thinking about the fact that we're meaning making creatures,
Yeah.
and that the story, and maybe we would locate that in the human brain in the framework that you've just provided, but that story that we tell ourselves about the meaning of life and what we're up to and the threats that are before us or the opportunities triggers the reptilian and the mammalian responses in us. And that's the tender and curious point of the evolutionary question.
Yeah, exactly right.
And,
exactly right. And so when you think about it, the fact that if we don't consciously try to deal with our consciousness, if we don't consciously think about our thinking and our feeling and our reacting and our belonging and our survival, if we don't consciously think about it, reactions are happening and firing off with us, including reactions stirred by other people around us. And where this really becomes relevant in our world is when you talk about both political dictators and economic algorithm manipulators who would like to control more and more of the real estate of our consciousness.
yes.
And when you put all of that in there, that's why I think there is a very rich and vital future for spirituality, because I think we're going to only become more aware of how important it is as individuals to have practices that help us manage our consciousness and to be part of communities, because we are belonging creatures, and we will need communities who help us, in a sense, reinforce and create models for imitation of healthy kinds of consciousness management. And that doesn't, and I'm talking about this in very sort of biological, psychological terms. That's not ruling out, what we traditionally think of as spirit, but it's saying that however we talk about that emerges within our own experiences as evolving hominids.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm sensing, help me if I'm blurry here, but that these forces that you've named, which I think are exactly right, are almost like colonizing forces, colonizing our imagination for a future of anything, for imagining the kind of world that we can create. And absent or in functioning in what could be a poverty of imagination, we then could fail to craft a story big enough to hold the diversity of our world, to hold the wholeness of all creation. And so maybe it's that I'm wondering, is that the question before us is, can we scale our imagination enough that all are involved or all are included, everything, interdependence is honored, or is the danger that the story that we craft would be insufficient to hold the fullness of creation?
Yeah, well, this may be a way to say this, Cameron, is to say we have dueling stories in our world.
Yeah.
And some people are crafting a story that's big enough to hold all of this. And that story isn't just sort of an intellectual construct, it's also an affective. That's why I think it involves all those different segments of our brain. When St. Francis saw a wolf or a bird or a tree and would say, there's, brother wolf and there's sister tree, one way to say that is he was using that affective belonging part of his brain which is very feeling. And it's not just up here, it's also, in the deeper brain, what we often refer to as the heart, but he felt that affinity. And so some of us are doing this. We are right now. This is what Joanna Macy and others, David Corton and others have called the great turning. It's a turning in human consciousness, or what Sister Ilia Delio calls the second axial age. It's it's shifting our consciousness on a new axle, so to speak. It's a new axial age. But this is contested. And this is where religion and spirituality, right as people are ready to sign their death warrant, you realize that, look, if you don't have communities of people who are concentrating on this as a super important part of life, we either get eaten up by racism, racist politics, or by money and economics, the totalitarianism of capitalism, or socialism, or some other form of economics. But the idea that we only measure things in terms of these exchanges of some sort of money or currency or coin or whatever. Gosh, human life could be, we have stories that are reducing our imagination to this. And probably the majority of people on the planet right now have lost their ability to imagine a world that isn't controlled by our current economic system.
Yes.
And it's not that they're refusing to, they literally have nobody who's poking through the dome, or I'm thinking of the Truman Show, and helping us imagine a different world. And this, to me, is the vital work of spirituality. And by the way, before I forget it, I should just say, if you have this in mind and you go back and read the book of Genesis in the Bible from chapter 1 to chapter 50, Genesis starts with human beings living in harmony with our environment, and it ends up with human beings enslaved in an empire. Yeah. So tell me that our ancient ancestors didn't realize this was they saw exactly what we're talking about in their own terms and language and poetics, but that's what's there, and someone like Jesus comes on the scene and proclaims good news of the kingdom or empire of God that is a subversion of the current system. So he says, repent, which means rethink everything. Suddenly you see that religion has been dealing with these super vital issues all along. It's just that certain forms of the religion have had their imagination,
yes,
squelched.
Right. And, entering the nuclear age, never before have we had the capacity to destroy ourselves without the wisdom to know not to do so.
Yeah.
You are publishing. It is not out yet. It comes out in May, I think. Your next book, which this is 122 that you've published so far. This one I'm really, I've been excited about all of your books, but this one, of course, the question is the one that we're all whispering to each other. A few of us may be brave enough to say out loud, do I stay Christian?
Yeah.
Is the title of it. Tell us about what invited that title and book to come to you.
Well, as you know, and maybe some other folks know, this word deconstruction, that's been sort of a big deal lately. I mean, in some ways, people have been asking this for these questions for 200 years, and longer in different ways. But, I wrote my first book in 1998. And I think I was, in some ways, it was the question I was grappling with then. Is what we call Christianity, is this it? Does it have nothing more to offer than what I've been, what I see around me now? Is this something I can live with? And so for me, I've been grappling with this question for a long time. But what's really interesting, it feels like a whole new generation, accelerated by Trump and accelerated by the climate crisis and accelerated by the pandemic and any number of other factors, more people than ever are coming to the edge of this thing and saying, what is this thing, Christianity? Do I even want to stay part of it? And so the book isn't apologetic to tell people why and how they have to stay Christian, nor is it saying, let's abandon ship and run away from this thing. In some ways, it's trying to help people look around and ask the question in a moral and responsible way. You could say, I'm trying to help people ask the question of staying Christian in a Christian way.
Well, I think we'll all look forward to the guidance for that. When you think about as we're all wrestling with it, because the question I think actually you helped me articulate years ago was, is the brand of Christianity irrevocably tarnished by the ways in which it has been used and misused, particularly in the public square? What that has invited for a number of us, I think, is a curiosity about all kinds of different wisdom sources,
Yeah.
so that we're in pursuit of, for me, that has become an expression of, a curiosity around mysticism and studying the mystics and, exploring that part of a tradition that I had not yet explored. But it grants permission, just that title grants permission to wonder about a spirituality beyond a defined Christian, Jewish, Muslim, but beyond the labels that have gotten us this far. What are your instincts around? Do you see us moving towards a kind of blurring of all of these, or a distinction? Do the distinctions hold and a deepening in each tribe, or how do you see this stream of spirituality?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I think about it a lot. I wish I had a simple answer for it, but what I think an honest answer is, I see all of the above. I think, let's just say it this way. If we were to take the worst case scenario that we could imagine for Christianity, in my mind, it's not Christianity disappearing. The worst case scenario is the ugliest forms of Christianity, and forms even uglier than we've yet imagined. Seeing the ugliest forms of Christianity growing and multiplying and becoming more vigorous and robust. But it's not just Christianity. Christianity is 31% of the world's population. Islam is 24%. Well, look, the same thing is happening in Islam. There are uglier forms of Islam in the world today than there have ever been, but there are also more beautiful forms. And any of us who've been privileged to have deep encounters with our Muslim friends who are at part of this sort of vanguard, when I see what they're doing in Islam to make it beautiful and to mine its treasures and bring them to bear on today, I look and think, well, why don't I do that as a Christian? So I think we'll see both of those things happening at once. We'll see more beautiful expressions of our religious traditions, more ugly expressions of our traditions, and we'll see people leaving our traditions. The question is, what are they going to do? And some of them, what they'll do is they'll listen to these beautiful sectors of different religious traditions, and they'll be listening to each other, and they'll be listening to all of them. And each of them will be listening to each other, because I think whatever happens is the creative people, the people leaning into harmony and love and justice and compassion, all of those people will necessarily become the kind of people who listen to each other and want to learn from each other. So I think that creates this, there's all kinds of worst case scenarios that are easy to imagine, but there are best case scenarios that I also think we need to spend more time just playing with and seeing what, and actually, as soon as you imagine it, you realize, oh, that's happening over there, and that's happening inside me.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So it's also just shining a light on what is already so.
See, one of the dangers, I think, of asking about the future is that we sit back and think, what are other people saying it might happen so I can adjust to it? And as soon as we do that, to some degree, we are throwing our own agency out the window.
Yes.
And so I think we have to ask this question in a way that re-energizes our own agency. I heard someone say about the big lie, Trump's big lie, but they said there's another big lie that's equally dangerous. And that's the big lie that everything is so bad, we all might as well just give up and, watch another Netflix binge-worthy series and give up.
I'm grateful you brought that back up. As you were talking about our meaning making and storytelling and how that can animate the present and the future, I was thinking about a topic that has become gratefully more accessible, of dealing with cultural trauma. And the fact that I think more people are acknowledging, given all that we're living through, that there's something to be learned from studying the impact of cultural trauma, and that the starting place of understanding part of the violence of the experience is that in a trauma culture, you have a deadened responsibility, as in your ability to respond, to create, to your agency. becomes paralyzed either through your own doing or through forces outside of yourself, through, giving up, not trying, believing that it's so bad it's not worth the effort, or there are systemic, forces that keep you down. And that's something that we should think about is as we're living in the present, the value of futuring work. Part of what has drawn me to the question is we're using imagined futures every day to make decisions, because we're anticipating what's headed our way, whether we're right or wrong, So it's actually the most creative act that we could make conscious is thinking, what are the possible extraordinary futures that we could move towards that enable our agency to create a phrase you and I both use, a more just and generous world for all.
It's funny as you say that. I'm thinking, Cameron, it is so true. We get buffeted by trauma, and we get drained by anxiety. And you could say that one definition of anxiety is anticipated trauma. Like when traumatized people, have been hurt, and then they think, and this could happen again, that horrible experience could happen again. And so then, that creates just loops of anxiety where the memory of the past and the possibility that it could happen again re-traumatizes us and keeps us in constant anxiety. And no wonder we're drained. And so then you think, let's just say that's a logical place where many of us are. Think, gosh, somebody ought to start something like at least once a week where we get together and we try to maybe hear some music that'll help us re-energize and find some ways to purge ourselves of some of this anxiety and guilt and hate and fear. And maybe somebody could say something to encourage us, right? Suddenly you realize that your original question, the people who are giving up might be giving up, when they're, 25 miles into a marathon,
Right. So that invites another question that I've wondered about in this same topic. I think a lot of the rituals that we've used, whether they be formalized in institutional religion or not, but they've been wonderful tools to help us steady ourselves, gain wisdom, encounter God, process that encounter, I should say. I wonder what you think about which of our rituals we will carry forward and where we might place our imagination or direct our imagination in new ways as we're thinking about that preferred future spirituality.
Oh my goodness. Well, as you may know, this is a project that I actually began when I was writing a book called Why Did Jesus, Moses, the Buddha, and Muhammad Cross the Road? Diana Butler Bass uses this term retraditioning, meaning taking some of these rituals and traditions and putting new meaning to them. And what I realized when I was writing that book, which is about religious identity and religious hostility and violence, is that many of our rituals actually, in a sense, create a seedbed for violence. So, for example, if we understand the Christian ritual of baptism is to say, I was born with original sin, and baptism is washing away my original sin. I used to be dirty, but now I'm one of the clean. And it teaches us to go into the whole world and put everyone in the category of baptized clean, or born again Christian clean, or spirit-filled, fire baptized, tongue-speaking Christian clean. However we do it, right? Clean, and all those other people dirty. And so you can see how, and when we divide the world into clean and dirty, we have just rendered the world more vulnerable to ethnic cleansing, right? And all kinds of horrors. And then it caused me to go back and reread in the New Testament about baptism. And I wrote about this in that book, but if you just think, the guy we call John the Baptist, his father was a baptizer, doing ritual baths to keep cleansing going in the temple. He leaves the temple, goes out into the natural world, what we might call secular space, or at least space that's not claimed by any religious organization. And he baptizes people in a river, what is that symbolism? And then when I fast forward in the New Testament to the book of Acts, where Peter goes it's in Acts 10 for anybody who wants to look it up. It really is worth reading. He goes to the house of an unclean Gentile. And in his presence, instead of him bringing enlightenment to Cornelius, in a sense, the experience brings enlightenment to Peter, where he says, I shouldn't call anybody clean or unclean. In other words, whatever this ritual is about, it's not about dividing people into clean and unclean. So that to me became this paradigmatic example. What would happen if we went back and took a fresh look at our rituals and purged them of some of these meanings that, have like viruses, snuck into our software, and the same thing with the Eucharist. Oh my gosh, what an incredibly meaningful ritual, but it's been reduced to who is worthy to receive this among the unclean. And it's been turned into a kind of blood sacrifice so that an angry God won't have to inflict torture on imperfect people. Well, whatever Eucharist is going to be going forward, if we are going to retain it, we need to retain it with a new and broader and deeper and more holistic and healing framework than that.
I'm hearing in both of those examples, which are fabulous, that maybe the litmus test for rituals with that give life and serve the common good versus those that don't is what brings us together and honors our interdependence, what holds us together, and then those rituals that create the othering, the division between us and them, the dualist mind. That those are the rituals that have gotten us this far, but that don't really serve us going forward.
Yeah.
Do you think that's?
I'm always hesitant to make anything about one thing, but I think that's a really central to it. I agree. In fact, if you look at, I don't want to get too, biblically nerdy here, but if you think about a place in the New Testament where the Eucharist is going wrong and it has to be corrected, in 1 Corinthians, Paul writes to this church and he says, and the problem is people are coming together and some people are eating all the food and drinking all the wine before anybody gets there. So they're creating haves and have-nots, and the overfull and the hungry. I mean, we can't imagine a world where some people have too much and other people don't have enough. So what they're doing is they've lost the meaning and they're replicating the existing social structures of this world. And Paul gets really upset with them. He says, this isn't even the Lord's Supper that you're eating. This is like, you have totally botched this up. And so interesting, it's not because of a faulty theological understanding in some esoteric, systematic, dogmatic way. It's you guys are replicating the haves and have-nots of this world. And if this table means anything, it's a table where all are welcome and all are equal and all are fed. So yeah, these things go wrong. And if we try to fix it, we can guarantee that in 10 years, it'll be unfixed. So if we just were to understand, this is a constant process of vigilance and creativity and renewal. And maybe some things, as you said, the brand becomes totally worthless. Like, look, I can, through a big part of Christian history, the veneration of relics was one of the biggest practices of Christianity, and that's sort of receded now. I can sort of go back and see why it would be a very precious and rich thing. I can also see why it would be distorted and turned into sort of Disney World of body parts. It's kind of gruesome. But our own history gives us examples. Things sometimes get put aside. Maybe they get put aside for a few centuries and rediscovered in some other way. But we've got to keep the rediscovery work open. Just because one brand of car turns out to really be rotten, it doesn't mean that you get rid of all cars. Just because fossil fuels are destructive, it doesn't mean you say, well, we don't ever need transportation again. No, you just say, well, we got to find different ways to do our transportation and home heating. And maybe we decide some things just don't need to continue. If Fox News didn't continue, we'd probably have a better world. But
Here, yes, we would. Though a lot of people in my life would disagree with that.
Yeah.
If you were to think about a curriculum, this is my second to last question, a curriculum of people to listen to right now, or books to read, or sites to visit, but places to tune our attention that you think are telling the right story, are feeding the right parts of us, or the holistic ones that would lead us to a preferred future. Anything top of mind for you that you would?
Well, there's something immediately is the top of my mind. Probably one of the best books I've read in the last 20 years is Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass.
That's so good, isn't it?
Because she is helping us develop an integrated vision of the world that has deep roots in her native lineage. And I think of Caitlin Curtis's beautiful book, Native, and I think of the Episcopal bishops, retired Episcopal Bishop Stephen Charleston's most recent book, and I'm just drawing a blank on the title. Beautiful book, all from a Native American, First Nations sort of grounding. So I've just been, and I could add several other titles of, Neither Wolf Nor Dog, so many books that are trying to help us go back, and even the resurgence of interest in Celtic Christianity, which in many ways was one of our last memories of an indigenous, spirituality. I was looking today at John Philip Newell's book, Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul. I think about, so that's one whole genre, books that help us get back in touch with the earth and a different way of relating to the earth. And then another thing that comes to mind in that regard, sometimes it takes fiction to take us there. Last year or a year before, I read a novel called The Overstory. That was a book trying to help us. It was a book woven together by trees. And anyone who reads that book will find it, it's unforgettable. It takes them into a different way of relating to the world. So those would be one category of books that would come to my mind right away. I also think I always try to have a book of poetry, by my bedside or in my bag when I travel. Thank God for these beautiful artifacts of books that still help us.
I think it matters because that's that old adage, what you feed grows. And it matters that we're tuning our attention, I think, to places that provoke the kind of passion that we just saw you describing these books, that we need to be tuned into messages of hope for our future. I think that you've answered clearly that you do think that there is a future for spirituality. If you could offer one word, if one word comes to you, if you were thinking about those of us today who are trying to dream of that future, what's the word that we could hold in our imagination as a guidepost for us or a beacon?
Well, I think it's the word imagination. It's the word you brought up, and in some ways, I don't think we can use that word, at least in the Christian theological context, without thinking of Walter Brueggemann in his book, Prophetic Imagination, to help us imagine a world so different from the world that is, so that we have new possibilities. As part of my attempts, successful or unsuccessful, to keep my sanity, I have been working on a science fiction novel, and these are great times for writing apocalyptic and dystopian science fiction, but it's almost like we need the opposite. We need to do that because we have to warn ourselves with the direction we're going, but we need to inspire our imagination for what's possible, which really is what you're doing with this, with what we're doing right now. You're trying to help people stretch their imagination to simultaneously say, what we're doing and the way we've done it does not have a great future. But that doesn't mean we should give up. It means that we have to go deeper and find what were the deeper things that we were doing that made what we were doing so precious, and how can those things be, unleashed going forward.
Where can people buy your book?
Well, I guess it'll be available all the standard places. Yeah, and May 24th is the release date. And if people are interested, the book I wrote most recently, that in some ways is a nice prequel to the upcoming book, is called Faith After Doubt. That's also available.
It's so good. It's so
and I always say to people, if you possibly can, support an independent bookseller.
Yes. Yep. And so go to BrianMcLaren.net and you'll find all the goodness there. So Brian, thank you for this time.
Thank you. Thanks for the good work. And thanks for each person who is letting their imagination get fertilized and accelerated through this time.